Perfect.
Yeah, all good, is it?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, welcome everybody. London Excel Meetup number, I don't know what. Today we've got Brent Allen. It's Office Scripts along with Power Automate and Power Apps today, of which I know very little about. So hopefully other people along with Brent can help in the chat. I'm going to be useless. So I think it's interesting for a lot of people, and don't worry if you're kind of new to this stuff, because I think from what Brent said, and he'll explain it himself, it's more of how this stuff works together. I know a lot of people coming on these calls are probably quite new to the Power kind of family, and obviously Office Scripts is kind of new for everybody. Yeah, so it'll be a nice introduction, a nice awareness of all this stuff for everyone, really. Just a quick mention from me in respect of upcoming meetups, like I always do. And there should have been notifications for long-term members at meetup.com. But we have 27th of October, which is a Tuesday. Well, they're all Tuesday. The next one at 6 o'clock UK time, normal time for kind of regulars will know. This is back to formulas. So I like to try and mix up these meetups between, you know, more technical or visual or formulaic ones. So we've got the let function. We've got Roger Govio for that. Then we've got the 10th of November with Power Query, with Win Hopkins. Key thing to note on that is that it's at 12 o'clock. So for Europe, you know, it's a lunchtime session because Win's coming over from Perth, Australia. So just bear in mind, it's not the usual time that. Hopefully you can all still attend, but I know it's quite different for this meetup group at least. I know other groups do lunchtime sessions a lot. And then 24th of November, back to usual 6 o'clock, we've got Oakley, who's here with us today, looking at customizing Excel to work for us. So hopefully loads of tips and tricks there. Once again, something quite different. You know, how you can benefit your working life, your Excel experience by just not using the one that you get straight out of the box, the one that everyone has. We can tailor it for us, you know, increase their productivity and all that lark, which is good. More time for eating biscuits. That's what we want. And that's all I say. I'm now going to hand over to Brent, if it's okay to I'll stop my share.
Awesome.
Yeah, go for it, buddy.
Okay, welcome everybody, and I'm going to share my screen. Let's make sure that everybody can see me. So I'm hoping everybody can see my deck.
Yep.
So we'll be starting that. Okay. So welcome everybody. And today, really, what we're going to be discussing is really how we're going to be working with the Office scripts that have just been introduced, and they went live at the beginning of October within the Power Platform, notably Power Automate and Power Apps. And we're at the end of this, we're actually going to be developing kind of a quick Power Apps solution with Power Automate, as well as an Office script to solve potentially a business problem. So who am I? So I'm based in Toronto, Canada. I've got about 20 years experience working with SQL, with VBA, done a little bit of Power Query, Power Pivot. I've been an analyst in both financial departments as a senior financial analyst, as well as IT departments as a senior business analyst. I'm an instructor on Pluralsight. I have 2 courses there, one in financial spreadsheets and the other actually on Office scripts. And I do some independent consulting on Excel and Power Platform through my site, which is macrordinary.ca. So what are we going to be going through today? So we're going to be starting with kind of an introduction of what is Office Script and how we would set it up, kind of the admin settings. And really where we're going to start is a simple, we're going to use the script recorder. We're going to build just a hello world kind of Office script. Then we're going to actually move into Power Automate and explain why would we use Power Automate, what does Power Automate do, and how can we work with Office scripts in Power Automate. And we're going to be working with SharePoint as well. We're going to be introducing variables into our Office script. So how we would integrate additional values from Power Automate or Power Apps. And then finally, we're going to finish with Power Apps and introducing Power Apps. And then finally finish with running an Office script, taking values from Power Apps, throwing them into a Power Automate workflow, and getting them to run in a spreadsheet, which sounds a lot more complicated than it is. We're going to get through this pretty quickly. So what this session will not cover. So we're not going to be doing a deep dive into any sort of Office script code here. Paul Kelly did a great session on this a few sessions back. It's recorded, and I would really encourage anybody who wants to learn about Office script code. That's a great place to start. When we're doing our Power Automate, we're not going to be doing any of the UI flows, which is the newest function, robotic process automation, or the business process flows. Those require kind of advanced licensing and really are less common functionality. We're also not going to be discussing, as we get to Power Apps, the model-driven apps or the portal apps. These require additional licensing as well, and they use the Common Data Service, which is really a premium function within Power Apps. We're going to be focusing more on the Excel side of things. So let's start with what are Office scripts? So Office scripts, they allow users to automate solutions where cross-platform support and security concerns are most important, as compared with VBA, which is designed specifically to run on desktop and does have a lot as far as when you consider security, it's either on or off. In terms of looking at Office scripts, really there is a bit of an ecosystem here as far as Excel automation is concerned. And I think that this document that Microsoft has developed is really a great concept of where Office scripts fits in kind of the Excel automated ecosystem. So starting from the top left quadrant, you have VBA, which everybody knows and loves. It is the traditional Excel automation. It's usable by business users. It is designed for the Excel desktop. And really, VBA is something that a lot of people can pick up. Now, moving down to the bottom left quadrant, you have COM add-ins, VSTO, and that sort of technology. When you have those add-ins where you are connecting into a database and you've had formally compiled Excel programs, that's a COM add-in. And really, those are designed for professional developers to work with Excel. Bottom right corner, you have the Office web add-ins. And this is the first type of technology where they actually added the JavaScript API to communicate with Office. It is more complex than Office scripts because you actually do need to build up multiple files. You need to develop packages for there, and they really are designed for professional developers. So that leaves the top right corner, which is Office scripts, designed for end users to be able to do those kind of web collaboration in Excel Online as well as Power Platform. So as I could just tell, Office script will not replace VBA. It's worth repeating. Office script will not replace VBA. It is a very common question that's asked. Will Office script replace VBA? It will not. It is a different product designed for different purposes. There are three main uses for Office scripts. So the first one on the left is if you actually have a case where you have the Excel Online software and you actually need to use Excel Online for some particular reason. Since VBA does not work in Excel Online, you would need to use an Office script. Less common, really business practical. The middle one and the far right one are the ones we're going to be focusing a lot more on in this presentation. So the second one is called non-attended workflows. And that's where you use some form of a trigger to actually trigger an Office script instead of actually sitting there and pushing the button. And the final is remote applications. And that's Power Apps, where you're on a cell phone or you're on a tablet, you do something, it triggers an app in the background, and then it actually returns with a result. So before we get started, you actually do have to enable Office scripts, and we're going to be going through that quickly in our demo. These have been enabled by default in all business tenants and enterprise tenants as of October 1st. They may be disabled depending on what your tenant, your admin settings are, but they have gone live as of October 1st. We're going to be using the macro recorder to record our first script, our Hello World script. And once we get that started, it'll be in the Automate menu under Record Actions. And the difference between Record Actions and Record VBA Actions is that with Record Actions, you're only recording actually changes to the spreadsheet. So if you were to move your cursor from A2 to A3, that would not be recorded. Unlike VBA, where you would actually see cell A2 selected, cell A3 selected. And we'll go through that as we demo it. So time to go into Office script. Let's record a script. So I'm going to go in here. We're going to go into Excel, and we're going to start our first Hello World. Sorry, actually, before we do that, I am going to make sure that it is enabled. So I'm going to go into my admin console. And under Show All, and under Settings, my org settings. And if I go into my org settings under Office scripts, you'll notice right here on the right side, let users automate tasks in Excel on the web is enabled. The other one is with respect to sharing scripts. We're not going to be doing that in any of this presentation, but as long as that's enabled, you're good. You can confirm that it's been enabled by the fact that you can notice on top, we actually have a tab called Automate. And there we are. So we're going to record our first script. So let's record some actions. So since this is a Hello World, then you can see on the right side that we currently have nothing recorded. So A1, I'm going to type in Hello World. I'm going to type in a now function to return the time that it is right now. And this is in Toronto, it's 1:14 in Toronto. And I'm going to add my own name. I'm also going to copy paste value on that. And once it's done, and you'll notice also that all the steps have been recorded on the right side. I'm going to stop the macro. And what we're going to do is we're going to name this macro, and we're going to name it Hello World Live. So if I want to replay this macro, then this is once again a very simple macro. I'll delete all the cells that I've got in place already. All I do, I'm going to close that down. I go back into my Automate tab. It's right there, my Hello World Live macro. I'm going to run it. And the steps that I just took are right there. Okay, so that is our first Office script macro. And I'm going to go back to the presentation. So what's great about the script recorder is, as you saw there, it's really easy to record a macro. It goes in, you record the steps, and it's very similar to what we've already experienced with VBA. The VBA macro recorder. But there are still two big disadvantages with using the script recorder. The first one is that if somebody were to go and say to you, well, why would I use Office scripts when I can just use VBA? And the answer is, if that's all it did, there is no reason. There is no business case to use that. And it still needs to be run in Excel Online. You can't run it offline or anything like that. So that's why we say, let's kind of take this to the next level and start into Power Automate. So let's go into Power Automate. So what is Power Automate? So Power Automate is designed to create workflows between apps and really connect data between files. You can get notifications, you can do approvals, you can collect data. There's a lot of things you can do. For the purpose of this, you can run Office scripts. So how do I work with Power Automate? Well, there's two parts to Power Automate. The first is a trigger. And the trigger is what kicks off a Power Automate workflow. And these are sort of things that you can do that would actually cause it to occur. There can only be one trigger in a Power Automate workflow. After that, you have actions. And actions are everything that's taken place after a automate is triggered. And it can include branching logic. It can include loops. It can include a lot of things. It can work with multiple applications. And really, actions are a lot of the heart of Power Automate. Excel is not a trigger. So when you're thinking in terms of Excel, you think of what sort of things you can do in Excel. So you say, well, if I save a file, well, why isn't that a trigger? Well, the trigger here, it would be, where are you saving? Are you saving it in a OneDrive? Are you saving it in a SharePoint? These are the sort of things that can trigger, but there's nothing you can say within Excel itself saying, okay, I'm going to change a value in a cell and that's going to trigger. That you can't do that. You can change the file and have a SharePoint trigger. However, Excel itself cannot be a trigger. Excel can only be an action. So examples of triggers that you can have within Power Automate. So one of them would be, for example, if you edited a file in SharePoint, or if you uploaded a file into OneDrive. An example of an action would be if you uploaded that file into SharePoint, we want to get the file metadata. That would be an action. Or, as we're going to see later, running an Office script is something that you can do based on when a file has been uploaded into a SharePoint or a OneDrive. So let's try running our script that we just did, the Hello World script, and we're going to use Power Automate instead of triggering it through Excel. So I'm going to be going into Power Automate. So I'm going to close down the Hello World file there, and we're going to go into here. Let's go here, and we're just going to create a new file. And what we're going to say here is, let's actually go and trigger it to say, let's run our Hello World macro that we just recorded, Hello World Live, when we upload it to a SharePoint. So we're going to say, when a file is added, is created in a folder, and that's going to be our trigger in SharePoint. And it starts by kicking this off. And my site address, you can actually go and define. So we're going to say, all right, with it, my site here is my meetup groups. And we're going to go into shared documents, the London Meetup, and it's going to be Hello World 1. Now, that has actually triggered. We've said that when something is uploaded to that folder ID, we're going to trigger. And our next step is the action that we're going to take. So the next action is going to be, we're going to go into Excel Online. And within Excel Online, they have something called Run Script. So we're going to run the script. Our location, we do have to redefine our location. So it is the meetup groups, the documents, our file. Now, here's another neat thing. If you'll look there in file, any step that we've already taken is available as content later in the flow. So right now, what we're saying is our file that we created, which is the XMS file ID, is available later in the flow. Our script that we're going to run, and we know all of our scripts, is going to be called the Hello World Live script that we just recorded. This is going to be also called Hello World Live. I'm going to save this up and call this Hello World Live. Okay, so our script now is active. We're going to save it up. Let's go back. You'll notice that it hasn't been run yet. And this is our SharePoint that we've got set up for Hello World 1. So we have our Hello World file there, and I'm going to close that down. I have it sitting open here in Excel. And we're going to upload that into the Hello World 1 folder. And that should, if everything's been done properly, trigger the script that we just recorded. So let's go back into Power Automate. And you'll see, as we do here, we can refresh our flow. It sometimes takes a couple minutes for this to run properly. And it should just take a second. It is now running. You'll notice it is still running. And it has succeeded, which actually surprises me. So if I go in here into my Hello World, you can now see that it has run. The time's a little bit different because it's actually recording on a different time zone. And I'm actually kind of surprised that worked because it shouldn't have. So we're going to actually go back into the presentation and explain what should have happened and why I was expecting it to break. Does anybody have any questions so far?
There's a few in the chat. I don't know if you can see the chat.
I cannot see the chat yet. Let me see if I can go into the chat. Okay. Nope.
Actually, I think there's only one. I think
controls. Oh, no, that's darn. Okay. I don't know what's going on there.
No, let me just read them out.
If you could, because I'm oh, actually, yeah, is it up there? Okay. I don't know why I'm not able. Oh, there we go. There's the chat. I still cannot see it. Oh, there we go. Let me see if I can answer a few of them. So, can VBA be translated to Office script easily? The answer is no. There's no automation to do that kind of scripting. You do have to do very much a manual process. Can OfficeScript run on Android or iPad? As of now, no. You cannot run those. The only way you can run it is through Power Platform or through Excel on the web. Okay, so I think we're good for questions at this point. Why did I insert file ID in Power Automate in the run a script preview part? So if I go back into here, let's go back in here. So here, if I edit on the file, what I'm saying is I want to pick up that file, XMS file ID, from that file created in folder. So what that's saying is at no point do I actually have to hard code that name Hello World. It's actually picking up from the metadata that is created when I do this, when I actually upload the file. And what you can actually see if you dig down a little bit into this is you can actually see all the results that have come through. So you'll see here that when I uploaded, it uploaded one called Hello World 1. And here are all the outputs that have come out: the Excel file ID, the encoded file name, file content, and things like that, as well as the script that was able to run. And these are great features if you're looking to debug. So I'm going to move on to kind of the next step, which is replacing active elements in the script, because I'm actually wondering, because last night this actually is the same macro broke, so I don't know why it's working today. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, in theory, this should not have worked. And the reason why I thought it wasn't going to work is it's because it said it would have had a get active worksheet method. And when you run a script through Power Automate, you don't have any active elements. So you don't have an active worksheet. You don't have an active cell or things like that. So normally you would end up having to replace that get active worksheet, which says, show me the active worksheet, with a get worksheet command, which would be get worksheet sheet 1. And this is where we're going to start talking about the difference between what is an attended macro versus an unattended macro. So when we went in and we ran this in Excel Online, and we actually clicked the button, and as you would do with VBA, the user triggers the script. That's an attended macro. An unattended macro is when we ran it through Power Automate. We uploaded it, and we didn't actually do anything to trigger that macro. The macro was triggered by code. So where you can start seeing that potential is you can actually say you had 100 files and you needed to run them all through code. You could drag them all into your Power Automate flow, and it would run all 100 concurrently, instead of having to go in and run them through, potentially go through paths of VBA. And that's where you can potentially see a lot of time savings, is in these non-attended macros. So what we're going to do with our script is we are going to make a couple of changes to that. So instead of hard coding the time that I use the now function, and the person being myself, we're actually going to go and change those to variables, and we're going to modify our flow in Power Automate. We're also going to modify our Office script so that it'll take in those additional values. So let's go and fix the script. So let's go back into Excel Online. And we're going to open up Excel. And we have our Hello World that we've got locally. And here it is. And we're actually going to go in to the code of here. Now, I said we're not going to do code, but we're going to do a little bit of code. So one thing we are going to do, and as I said, I didn't quite know why it worked there, because it does say that it's get active worksheet. So we are going to actually modify that to get worksheet. And we're going to change that to sheet 1, just so we remove those kind of active elements. Now, the other thing we want to try is go and say, well, instead of getting the value just being now and then going and doing that copy paste, so I'm going to actually comment out this section where it actually gets the additional copy from. And instead of this being a now, we're just going to call this current time. And we're going to call this, instead of just me, current person. Now, where is it getting it from? And the answer is we're going to get it up top. We're going to get it actually in the main function. So right now it just says workbook, Excel sheet workbook. So the current time we can get there, and it's going to be a string, and this is when we get to Power Automate. I'll show you why we're using a string instead of a number, and then current person, who should also be a string. Okay, we're going to save up our script. We could run this again, but current time and current person are not values at all. It's not actually picking up from anywhere. So if we tried running it right now, it would blow up because it doesn't quite know where it's getting its values from. So yeah, it doesn't really return much of anything. So we're going to actually go in and fix that in Power Automate. So let's go back into Power Automate, and we're going to modify that script that we just ran. So here is, oh no, that's and into Power Automate. So we're going to create a new flow. We're still going to use SharePoint. And we're going to do it when a file is created in a folder, the way that we did before. Our site address will still be the meetup groups. Our folder ID will be the shared documents, the London Meetup, and the Hello World 2 directory. Now, because we're looking to get the time, we can add in some new steps. So our first thing we want to get potentially is, what is the current time? We don't need any additional information at this point. It says we'll be able to use those outputs later. So we're going to convert that from my time zone to yours, to the London time zone, to UTC. So let's go and say, well, let's convert that time zone. Our base time, we can actually get from that current time. So I'm going to add a dynamic value by hitting Control Space, and I can actually collect that current time from earlier. My source time zone is the Eastern time zone. The destination time zone will be UTC. And we'll give it a nice format string, which says, what is the full name, full date, and time pattern? The next thing we're going to do is to try and get who uploaded this file. So the first thing we need to do actually is go back into SharePoint. And in order to get some information from SharePoint and actions, the first thing you need to do actually is to get the metadata of the file. And metadata provides some additional information with respect to the file that we can use later. So we're going to be going into our meetup groups. And the file identifier that we've created is that XMS file ID from earlier. The next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be getting the file contents. This by getting the file metadata, it doesn't actually have the name in it. So you actually have to get some additional information in order to get that username. So SharePoint, and we want to get the file properties. Get the file properties. Our site address is still the same, the meetup groups. The library name is the documents. And the ID that we're going to be getting is from the prior step, the file metadata, which is the item ID. Finally, what we're going to do is add in our Office script that we just created. So we're going to run the script. Our location is in the Pluralsight courses. Oh, no, not Pluralsight courses, sorry. It is in meetup groups. The document library is the documents. The file that we're going to be we are going to be accessing is the file that was created up top. So we want the original file, the file created in folder, XMS file ID. And the script we're going to run is the Hello World Live. Now, having created that Hello World Live, and notice that I created some variables earlier, it actually now asks me for what are the two variables that I want to add into my script. So I can actually add those in as dynamic content into my script from the values that I created earlier in the script. So the current time that I want is the converted time zone, and the current person that I want is from the file properties. I want the modified by display name. And this one we're going to call Hello World 2. We're going to save it up. And then if I go into my meetup groups here, I'm going to be going into Hello World 2, and I'm going to upload the Hello World, which is just once again a blank file. And let's see if this works. All right. All right, just sometimes takes a couple minutes to trigger. Okay. So it is now triggered and running. Triggered and running. And it has succeeded. If I go into my SharePoint and I open that up, you can now see that it has taken those values from the Power Automate flow and has put them into cells A2 and A3, along with my Hello World statement that was fixed. So we're going to go back to asking if there's any questions with what we've done so far.
I don't think there's any more, Brent.
Okay.
Unless anyone's got a question now. I think there's...
All right. If nobody has any questions, we're going to move on to kind of a real world scenario where we might be able to use this kind of technique. So, and this is actually something that I personally experienced, though I used a different approach back in the day. So you have a company that has an Excel template that they use for their annual budgeting process. And what they do is they submit, they have this Excel template, they send it out to a variety of different business units, and each one of them kind of submits their own budget. And then what happens is that they all take their budgets, they do them, and then they send them all back to head office, who creates a master budget, which is presented to the company executives. So how would you typically have done it before? Well, you'd collect your budgets probably by email. So you'd send them out, they'd send them back by email, you'd put them into a folder, then you'd probably run some sort of VBA code to roll up all that information into a single master file. And that's the way that I personally would have done it years ago. What was through that approach. A more modern approach may be to use something like Power Query, but to have Power Query, you probably have to have some sort of semi-structured data. Otherwise, you're going to end up with some really complex Power Queries if data is all over the place. The big disadvantages of this kind of traditional approach is, and especially if you're not using Power Query, is it's resource intense. You've got people running VBA code. They're monitoring their inbox for budgets that are coming in. And it is a very resource intense process. And second of all, typically that also comes with the fact that you're not updating very frequently. It's that typically you'll update every day or two as data comes in, and then you run that macro. So we're going to go to a different approach. And the approach we're going to use is to use our Office scripts, and we're going to use Power Automate. Plus, in addition, we're going to use Power Query, because when it comes to actually combining information, Power Query, Power BI, I mean, we're going to use Power Query and Excel is really the best way to do it. You don't want to over complicate things by making your Office scripts too big. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by saying, well, you upload the file into SharePoint. You use an Office script that you've set up to trigger when on that upload to clean the information. And finally, you'll use Power Query and Power to combine that information from the SharePoint folder. What are the advantages? Well, the big one is that it is less resource intense. So really what ends up happening is you don't have people constantly running VB scripts, and you don't have to have something like a dedicated terminal. And as you upload additional files, you can actually update your underlying file as you need it. So let's see this approach actually in action. So what I've done here is we've got something called the budget learning exercise. So the budget exercise, and this is something that's actually not in Excel online. It's actually just on my workstation. And it looks like this. It's pretty simple. And as of right now, we have three units, Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3. And they are pulling information from a data cube. And that data cube is built up through a Power Automate. So if we were to look into our queries and connections, really the way that this works is that it actually extracts all information from the SharePoint, that SharePoint folder where it is all located. So if you look in File, I would have gone in from SharePoint folder. There is some transformations that need to be done, but not really a lot. But our raw files, really what we have are ones that look similar, but there's a little bit of a difference. There's a little bit of a difference between them. Is that first of all, there's no data table here. You'll notice the units are up top. There's actually a hidden column there to explain whether it's a revenue, expense, or summary. And normally, traditionally, to fix that, what you'd probably do is run it through a VBA script, set up those tables, and then use your Power Query to do that combination. But we're going to do it is we're going to use Office scripts and have a SharePoint portal to actually combine those three things together. So you'll notice as of right now, and in this particular template, we have three business units: Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3. And what we'll do is, if we look in the in here, and if we just look in Power Automate, effectively what we're doing is we've got it's a relatively simple script. We don't take in any additional parameters. And what this script does really is it does a little bit of cleaning. It cleans up the formats. It creates a data table. It adds a table. It moves some things around. And it basically puts things into a table that really our Power Automate can really pick up. And it renames it so that we end up with that one table called budget data table, so that Power Query isn't confused by having a whole bunch of potentially different table names. You always have that one consistent table name. That script will trigger when we run our Power Automate flow. Now, I've already built this one particular flow, so I'm going to go in and just actually show the flow instead of trying to build the flow on the spot. So if I go and edit here, really, it is just 2 steps. It actually just says when you upload something to the budget example, then run that script budget data upload. So what we're going to do then is we're actually going to do that, and we're actually going to go, and I've got this one called budget example, and you'll see Unit 1, 2, 3. Now we've also now created a Unit 4, and Unit 4. You'll see it has $219,000 in net income, and it's on the similar kind of formatting as everything else, but it's not in the SharePoint yet. So we're going to upload Unit 4 into our SharePoint. Okay, so it's now uploaded. And this, what it will do is that now it's been uploaded, and I'm going to go into here, and I have my budget exercise. And you'll see 9 seconds ago I uploaded it, and the flow has succeeded. If I go in here and I click refresh all, and this will just take a second. It's retrieving the information. It's retrieving data. And this will just take a second. And you'll notice now that we have unit 4 into our budget exercise spreadsheet with the same, with values that are from the unit 4, and we can slice and dice it the way we were expecting. All right. So, so does anybody have any questions so far about that sort of script? Before we jump into Power Automate. So we have one that says, attendee register exists on forms, their name and radio button called present. When they submit the form, the script should run in Excel Online, capture the radio button response from the form. Microsoft Forms. So are you suggesting that you're looking to run an Office script on a Microsoft form? I'm not quite sure what the question is. So I see Chintan has a question. Okay, so I'm not sure about Microsoft Forms if it can be used as a trigger. If Microsoft Forms can be used as a trigger, and I can go and check and see if Microsoft Forms can be used as a trigger. And then the question really from there would be, going forward, actually, you know what, I'll just create a blank. So we have Microsoft Forms, and what sort of, and really it says when a new response is submitted. Now, what I don't necessarily know as far as from here is, okay, so we have this trigger. What information is passed from that triggering event into Excel, where then you would run that that Office script. So let me head back here and see if see what exactly the question was. All right. So you're saying, okay, we're creating something in a radio button in Forms, and the script should run in Excel Online. That writes the letter X in the cell with the current date and time that the user submitted the form. The answer is yes, you could. Because if you could use your form as a kickoff there, then technically what you could do is add the date time in and Power Automate as their own objects, and then run an Office script from there using the date time from Power Automate as the objects into your Office script. So I'm hoping that answers your question. As far as building up that Office script that you're looking for, and the Excel document, and you can hard code the value of the Excel document if you're looking to specifically build one Excel document and really just pile that on. Okay, so if that's the only question, then we're going to move on to the next step, which is going to be we're going to start looking into Power Apps. So we have another business problem, and it is not a specific problem to the year 2020, because it talks about traveling executives, and there are no traveling executives in 2020. So they're expensing items like meals and transportation. And what happens is that they pile up a whole bunch of receipts that they get when they're on their travel, and they hand those to the accounting team, and the accounting team enters those into Excel templates. And what's happening is that there's that delay in, I've got my receipts to give them to Excel, to get them to accounting, to get them into Excel, and there's delays in getting people reimbursed from their expenses. So what if there was a solution that allowed our executives to just enter their data on their cell phone, and they could use their existing spreadsheet templates? And guess what? You don't need additional software licensing. You already have it. And that's Power Apps. The official Microsoft is that it increases agility across your organization by rapidly building low-code apps that modernize processes and solve tough challenges. And that's the official terminology. What we'll be using here is we're going to be allowing end users to enter information into our data storage. So including Excel on your OneDrive, SharePoint list, or things like that, in a user-friendly way without having to write some complex code. And as long as you have a business license or an enterprise license, then the connectors that you need with Excel and with SharePoint are included. You don't need to go out and buy any premium licensing or anything like that. It's included in Office 365. So we're going to be designing a really simple Excel Power App, and it needs to be kind of built in 4 steps. So the first step that we're going to be doing is actually building our Excel template, and that's really what our kind of end product is going to look like, and what we expect to get out of our Office script. And the next step is the Office script itself, and that's going to be adding the automation, doing formatting, moving things around, making sure that we have that kind of consistency. Next step is the Power Automate flow, and it's kind of the glue that's holding together between the Power App and the Office script. It's taking that information from the Power App, moving it into the Office script, and doing that data transfer. And really the Power App, it's the first thing that the users interact with. It's the last thing we'll actually be working on. And that is really where you do the data input from the users, and it gets the information all the way through. So the objective here is to take the data that we've got in the Power App, flow it all the way back into our Excel template, which is sitting on OneDrive. We have 2 types of data that we're going to be needing for our Power App. So the first one would be a text field. So a text field would be a single piece of information, whether it be a piece of textual information or a piece of numeric information, a date, and it's just really a single piece of information. And the other are data tables, where we're actually building up a number of pieces of information, number of different records. So text fields, we're gathering in Power App through our text boxes. And the way we're getting them into Excel is we're actually going into our Office script and our Power Automate, and we're adding those as parameters along the way. Data tables are a little bit of a different story. So we're actually going to be gathering those through native Power App forms. And they, as you are adding information, input directly into an Excel table, as long as that Excel table is in OneDrive. You need to have under 2,000 records in a data table in Excel. Otherwise, you start deleting information. So don't use a Power Apps front end with an Excel database as your back end. That will be a recipe for disaster. If you're looking for something that's a really big database with a couple of thousand records, the first step you might want to go and say is something like a SharePoint list. And then if you're looking for really lots of data in the thousands, if not millions of records, that's where you end up in an actual database, whether it be a SQL server or a common data service or something along those lines, where you actually have a proper database for your Power App. We are in the template that we're going to be building. You'll see that really there are text fields, and the text fields are the dates as well as the person that we're expensing to. And the data table is the actual expenses themselves that we're going to be building up. The underlying data is actually taken from an Excel data table. And Power Apps, when you connect it, it creates a Power Apps ID column. And you'll see that that's column E on the table. And when you link your underlying Excel table into Power Apps, that file is automatically generated. Those Power App IDs are generated from Power Apps when you link into a data source. So our next step after we've created our template would be the Office script. So you'll notice in the Office script, so like when we did that Hello World 2 example, we're actually going to include elements as variables in the function. And these will be captured in the Power Automate flow that will be created. The data tables, however, so all of the expenses that are being gathered through that process should not be referenced similar to the way start date and end date are in the function itself. You only would be referencing those later in the script. So let's go, and first we're going to take a look at the template as well as the Office script that's being used in this before we start getting into Power Automate and Power Apps. So this is our template. It has the three fields up top, as well as that data down below, as well as this data that it's pulling in from a underlying data table. And you'll notice that the bottom one there, the lunch at the Olive Garden, actually isn't on the data table. I'd run it at an earlier time. So really what we're trying to do is copy this data into this template, as well as capture these fields from our Power App. So the next step is the Office script that we're going to be creating. So in the expense tracking form, okay, and we're going to go into the Automate, into our code editor, and we have the expense tracking script. And the expense tracking script, so because it is a little bit more complex, so this one has been pre-created, but I'll kind of walk through the elements of the script, is that the three variables that we've got that we created in the template, the start date, the end date, and the person we're expensing to, are going to be referred to up top by strings. We have our two sheets that we have. And what we're doing is, first of all, we want to clear the values here. And that's part 14, section 14 and 15. We want to get our header values, which are these values, and we're getting those specifically from Power Automate. So that's lines 18 through 20. Then what we're looking at doing is actually, and this is where it gets a little bit dicier, is we're copying that data from here to here, and we're going to be using, just using ranges instead of using the copy objects. A main reason for that is that Office script doesn't have a paste function. It has what's copy from, but the Office scripts can't access the clipboard. So you always have to use that copy from, and it's always faster to just move the range directly and actually the values directly without having to actually do a cut paste. Then later, as we get to cells 37 through 42, that's where we modify our formatting to create that box around our information and properly set our number formatting. So what it's doing really is taking that data from here as we're entering it in from Power Apps, copying it into that template, clearing out the existing values, and putting that total on the bottom. So next step is the Power Apps and the Office script using Power Automate. So when you're using Power Apps as your trigger, the trigger is Power Apps. And you don't have to add any information to use that trigger. Any app can be, any thing further down in the flow can use Power Apps as its trigger. It knows that it is Power Apps as the trigger. And to add a value from Power Apps, what you need to do is add a dynamic value, and you have to ask Power Apps to create that value. And what it'll do is it'll create a value. So if I'm looking to create one called run script, called start date, I would then ask and say, give me start date, run script underscore start date as my start date, and it'll create a default name. Only create the values you need. And there's a very good reason for this, and you'll find this out as you accidentally create values, is that there is no way to delete a value once you've created it. Every single value that you create, whether you use it in your app or not, if it's sitting in your Power Automate flow, you have to use it. And the only way you can get rid of these values is you actually have to go way back to the beginning, the Power Apps trigger, delete the trigger, recreate the trigger, and recreate all the values that you created along the way. You don't want to do that. So you really want to be confident in all the values you're going to need from your end app when you're creating your Power Automate. And we'll go over that when we get to the actual Power App itself. When we create those values in Power Apps, whether we create them further down, so say we created the start date in the run script, we can use it earlier in the script or later in the script because it reflects all of those values that we've created actually relate all the way back to the trigger, which is Power Apps. So you can create them, you can use them anywhere in the script. So let's go take a look at the Power Automate workflow that has been created. And I'm going to go into there and into Power Automate. And under my flows, there is one called the Expense Submission App. Now, what this one does, so you'll notice up top that we have that one called Power Apps. So the first thing it's doing is actually saying, okay, give me the metadata that I need. And the reason why I'm doing this is because later on in the process, what I need to be able to do is to get that file content, because what we're doing actually in the end is instead of saving that information back to the template, we're actually going to save it as a new file on our SharePoint and create that file on our SharePoint. The way that SharePoint does that is you actually create a file, use the file content that we get from our OneDrive metadata, and then you can name it however you wish. Okay. And our run script here, what you'll notice is that our expense tracking script has been created, and we've set up 3 variables in there, which we're going to be gathering from Power Apps. Now, if I wanted to create another variable, and once again, I'm not going to do this because I do not want it to persist, is that if I go under Power Apps and I can see the 3 that I've already created, if I go to see more, I can ask in Power Apps, and that will create a new variable on the flow, which I then have to use when I create that Power App, that Power Automate within my Power App. Okay. So what this will do is it goes through Power Apps, gets my expense tracking form, and then it says, well, run my script against my expense tracking form, which is taken up here from the file metadata, and give me 3 variables that I've defined through my Power App, get my file content, and then we're going to go and say, well, let's create a file. It's going to be whoever we expense to, expenses for the expense date, and it's going to contain the file content based on having already run the script up here in our OneDrive. We're going to save that to our to the SharePoint. So now we're going to start into actually Power Apps. We're going to build a really, really quick and simple Power App that's going to gather that information, potentially new information, and what it's going to do is say, let's gather that new information and then submit through a Power Automate to actually create that new file on the in the SharePoint. So you can connect straight into your Excel Online application right from the home screen. Once again, it has to be on OneDrive. You can't connect to any Excel files that might be located in SharePoint. And in doing so, it will actually build the start of the application with 3 screens referring to the table that you select. The first one is your expense is going to be all items in the table. You're going to have a detailed view when you drill down, which is going to be your detail screen. And then you're going to have a screen for editing data or adding new data. And using just those three screens, you can actually go into the file that you've got, your data table, and you can add data, you can edit data, you can delete data from the data table that you've got within your template folder. But you probably want to do a little bit more than just adding and deleting from an Excel file. So what we're going to be doing is after we add those data screens, we're going to add a couple additional screens. So we're going to add some blank screens, potentially a title screen, and we're going to add a success screen, which can be used to confirm the addition of your data. And then anything where you might have data stored in your list, like on your browse screen 1, you can access that anywhere within your app. So, so what we're going to do potentially as we go on is say, let's get the sum of all of our expenses and put that on our submission screen. When we get to our submission screen, we can add controls. So we can add in text inputs, we can add date pickers, we can add in buttons. And there's a whole bunch of controls that you can use. But in this case, we're really going to focus on those three because those are all the only ones we're going to need for our Power Automate example and Office Script example. Any case where we have an ask for data, you have to have a control in Power Apps. You don't have to. You could just use a fixed value, but you could actually gather that information from Power Apps. So you'll know the start date matches off, end date, and the expense to also matches off. When you have a button, you can associate a Power Automate flow with it. And when we click on the Power Automate, you can actually say anything where we have that Excel trigger, you can actually create a Power App, a trigger to that Power Automate flow from Power Apps. We need to configure it. So if we have any of those variables that we created, and remember how I said don't create additional variables, this is where you'll see them all. Every single variable you've created is going to show up here. And you can add those things in from the controls that you've got. Or you can add in fixed values, you could add in numbers, you can add in text fields or whatever. Just keep in mind that what you're passing there is the value itself. You're not trying to pass the whole control. So expense due, you're passing the text. From start date, you're passing a select date. Different controls may have different actual ways of getting the value out of it. And it's really a case of experimentation as you start doing with drop-down boxes or multi-selects or things like that. Once we've finished actually creating the app, you can use the play button in the top right corner to test your app. And once the testing is successful, the app can be saved and published. So let's build an app. All right. So let's go into Power. We're going to go into Power Apps. So we're going to go up top, and we're going to go right into Power Apps. And the data we're going to be starting with, and I'm going to be closing this down so that it doesn't conflict with anything. And we're going to close it down there as well. We're going to go into Excel Online in Power Apps. And in our OneDrive, in here, in London, we have one called the expense tracking form. And all of the tables, we have an expenses table in there, and we're going to connect to it. And as mentioned, we have now actually created a very simple Power App with all of the expenses that we've got. We can go into details for every individual expense line, and we can add or edit the expenses there. I'm just going to do a very minor tweak there to change the fields that we've got. So if I wanted to say, instead of it being the category up top, I want that to be the expense. I want this to be the category and this to be the amount. And now you can actually see those. If I wanted to add another one, so let's say I want to add in another expense right here. I can create a new item. My amount will be, let's say, $30. The category is meals. The expense could be lunch at the Olive Garden. And the vendor is the Olive Garden. I can click there. And then, so you'll notice that there it is there. We can also now go into Excel. And where you'll notice now is if I go into here on our data, it's now been added in to the data table. You can tell this one's new because this one was $30 when I did it originally. It was $25. We can also now modify this potentially. So say we want our night at the Radisson to be, instead of it being $772, we want it to be, say, $600. We could change that, save that up, go back. And if we look into our Excel table that we've got, and our data is now $600. So the next thing we'll do, I mean, it's great that we can add information, but we can't really create that additional file that we've created through our Power Automate. So we're going to add a new screen, and this is just going to be a blank screen. And what we're going to add in is we're going to add a label, and this will be, and first of all, say we want to know how much was our total expense across the whole thing. So we want total expense. Working. Oh, yeah, I do. Okay. And then say we want the total expense here. So you can actually go and say, let's refer to our browse screen, our browse gallery. And we want all items. And we want the amount. And this will actually go and say, give me the total that was the total expense that we have across the board. And if you go in here and actually look on that, you can actually drill down a little bit and say, well, here's the actual underlying data that we have, even though it's on a different screen and all that. We're going to add in a couple of text fields as well, because we need to capture who is the expense for. So we're going to say expense 2. Oh, okay. That's going to be. And we want our start date and our end date. And those are going to be date pickers. Now, keep in mind that obviously, if this was a full-fledged app, you'd probably want to spend a little bit more time on user experience. And so that's our start date. And we have our end date. Finally, in order to trigger our Power Automate, we need a button to do so. And then we go into the action there and select our Power Automate. Our Power Automate is going to be our expense submission app. I'm going to add that. And say, well, where are we? What are the 3 values we need? We need our start date, our end date, and who are we expensing it to? So our start date is actually going to be called date. And yeah, you probably want to name those a little bit better. It would be selected date. Date picker 1.1, select date. And then finally, you want to say your text input. and your text. At this point, we now have a functional app, and we're going to test it. So I'm going to expense this to myself. Start date I'm going to use will be the 1st to the 8th, and I'm going to click this button. And what this then will do is if I go into my flow, it will have been triggered 11 seconds ago. It succeeded. And if I look in my SharePoint here, and if I look at my expense tracking, you can see that I've actually created my expenses in the SharePoint from the template. And because that didn't save as an XLS file, I'm going to actually rename that because it has to be renamed as XLS. Yeah, but I would be able to actually change that. And that was the only issue here. Let's save that. Actually, I'll resubmit that so that it shows that it ran properly. So if I go back here and I do it again, the app is now running. It succeeded. And you'll notice that now my expenses are here in the template for the right dates to me. And then you can use it in downstream processes. So that's kind of the really quick Power Apps demo. And that really ends the presentation. So does anybody have any further questions?
I haven't noticed any in there, Brent.
Okay.
If anyone does have any questions,
is the
please feel free to speak up.
Yeah, we'll have any, if there's any questions, yeah, I'd love to take them.
Thank you, Brent.
Yes.
He's happy.
Oh, my internet connection is unstable.
What was that, sorry, buddy?
No, it's saying my internet connection is unstable.
All right, yeah. Hopefully it can hang on for a bit longer.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Brent.
All right.
I think
awesome.
It was a nice kind of introduction to, you know, a couple of the members of the Power family in particular, and obviously Office scripts. Which I think a lot of the members here is something that they've been asking for on the recent kind of survey we did. Like, people are interested. You hear these things mentioned all the time, but I don't think many people, you know, we have busy lives, have the opportunity to dive into them. So I think sessions like this are important. And
yeah,
I
so
you delivered it very well.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for coming.
If anyone does have a question before we sign us off, feel free. Or if you just want to say hello, it's always nice. I'll lose a question.
How you doing, Brent? That was really good.
Oh,
on, Paula.
Awesome.
Right. How you doing, Alan? I've watched a couple of presentations on this sort of stuff, and I still can't get the hang of it. It's well over my head. It just, I don't know. I just haven't had the time to spend really properly exploring and carrying out examples myself. Sorry. Hold on for a second, Kieran.
Okay.
There's an Office Scripts question, Brent.
Yeah, no.
But it's a few, I don't know if you can see the chat. There's a lot of people saying thank you, Brent.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure you can see
Yeah,
that.
awesome. Yeah.
Sorry, I was rudely interrupted.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna stop.
Yeah, I just find it all very interesting, and there's just so much to learn. And is there a resource that you could point beginners to?
The best resource, and really where I learned a lot of my Office scripts, and let me just actually, is actually the Office scripts documentation site. And let me just, and they go through a lot of kind of really, starting at the really basic. I think really the one of the best ways to start is kind of the same way that people would have started with VBA, which is use the macro recorder and play around with it. Find out interacting with one another and that kind of set range and things like that. As far as Office scripts are concerned. Power Automate and Power Apps, best resources by far is Microsoft Learn. They will take you from 0 to almost MVP level, because with the level of depth they go into to Power Automate, Power Apps especially.
Okay, that's great. I'll take a look at them. Thank you.
Do you have stuff on your own site, Brent, in respect of Office scripts and stuff?
A little bit, not much. Yeah, and it's more just that idea, and really, because honestly, and I tried to nip this in the bud early. The question here is Office scripts going to replace VBA? And you hear a lot of that. Should I learn TypeScript? Should I learn this, and how hard is TypeScript and all that? And really, if you want to do VBA, do VBA. And VBA isn't going away anytime soon. Yeah, really, I'm kind of starting to build up a little bit on my own site, but it's a case of just finding time to be able to add that information.
Yeah, I think some of us can relate to that. Cool. There was a question in the chat. It's a little while ago because of people saying thank you, but
yeah.
Oh, I think it's just asking about any issues when it comes to rolling it out to use, I think, from a business perspective.
Yeah, and really what I would say as far as rolling out to business and really doing this as action, keep in mind that Office scripts has only been in place for 2 weeks. So I'd be shocked if anybody has rolled this out to any size of business. I think really the first challenge you're going to see is the fact that, especially when you're working with Excel data tables, this has to be sitting on OneDrive. So you have to do sharing sharing information and things like that. As far as Power Automate itself and Power Apps, Power Apps is pretty established, and in that case, you have seen Fortune 50 companies using Power Apps to really drive a lot. And you see that in the Microsoft presentations, the Knights and the of the world, both companies have used it end to end. Power Automate, I've also seen used in a very professional context to do things like automated automation and automated approvals, and things like that. So Power Automate, once again, is really it's fully baked. But Office scripts, you can even see when you do Power scripts in Power Automate, it's still in preview. So they're still actually building things into that functionality within Power Automate as far as using those scripts.
Hey, cool.
When you said there that you've seen it being used to automate approval,
Yes.
I'm panicking here as an auditor and an accountant that you've completely bypassed a set of controls that's been set up by an organization in a workflow.
So the deal that where I've seen it used in professional context is, for example, if you're looking to do a capital asset purchase and you require a manager approval, a vice president approval, and whatever, then it would actually say send an email through Power Automate and send something to the manager saying, here's the information on this one particular deal that has been inputted via SharePoint or via Power Apps or whatever. Do you approve or reject and add comments? And then they can approve, reject, or add comments. And it creates that audit trail because you go and say approve, and it actually will say, okay, now I'm adding a locked field into a SharePoint list that says, here's the date and time where something was approved.
Most project management systems will do that anyway.
Workflow. Yes. If you're
Sage 500 does it fairly well.
Yes. And Power Automate's a direct competitor.
Okay. Oh, well, it wouldn't be a direct competitor to the software package. It would be a direct competitor to that one aspect.
Yes.
Of the software package.
Yes.
So if it's only tackling one aspect of a software package,
yeah,
there's a bit of a gap.
Yeah, Sage, you're looking more at fighting against dynamics there. At the full-fledged, but really where it's used, where I've seen it used very effectively is where your existing process, for example, is approval by email. And as an auditor, that must drive you nuts.
Yes.
Yes. So you're replacing approval by email to approval by workflow.
Okay.
So that's where I've seen that effective use of that replacement, because what ends up happening is you had that approval by email, the email gets lost, and then you have a disaster. So that's where I've seen Power Automate used really effectively. And it can be used effectively in those other things where you're looking to kind of move data between systems as well.
Yeah, I've seen it used for that very well. So I have moving data and recording certain things at certain times. I've seen it used for that extremely well.
Cool. All right. Any other questions? Any other chats, guys? Going quiet.
All right. I have scared people with Power Platform. That is impressive.
See, it is actually scary.
Enlightened people, I think. Don't be scared. I haven't really dived into it yet. I dabbled a little bit with Power Automate ages ago, and then you just get distracted by work and you can't.
Yeah,
they update it.
And then the newest thing in Power Automate is what they're calling UI flows, which is RPA, where if say you have a completely disconnected system, and I threw this at the beginning of the presentation, saying we're not going to talk about RPA, but you have a totally disconnected system. There's no APIs that you can call, none of that, but you want to get information from one system to the other. You can use UI flows to actually flow information from one system to the other. And that's where you just see these mind-boggling ROIs on projects.
Hey, were you doing the video?
Yeah, I'm on a call.
Oh. Little voice. A little bit shyer than mummy.
That's awesome.
Just say hi. All shy. I'll just keep her in here now because she won't talk and it'd be grand.
Yeah.
You're freezing.
I was outside with no jacket.
Well, I'm signing off. Thanks, Brent.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good.
Right.
Cheers, Chick. All right, team. Shall we sign this off?
Sounds great. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Really appreciated. Thank you, Alan, for setting this up.
Thanks a lot.
No worries.
Thanks,
Thanks a lot, Brent. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
See you guys. See you next time.
That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Say
Bye.
bye.
Yeah.
Say bye.
Bye.